Well, I fly that plane, call the angel flight.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to Patriot to the Core podcast. I am Thad Forrester, and welcome to this special edition. This is my third special edition in just the last few weeks, but the reason why this one is unique is because today, September 29th, is the anniversary of my little brother Mark's death in Afghanistan. He's the reason why I started this podcast, so that's why I am paying some tribute to him today, and I do, occasionally throughout the year as well. But today I bring in Mark's great friend and teammate Bobby Bonello, and we're going to talk about how Bobby found out about Mark's death, because Bobby was deployed downrange with Mark as well. He was at a different location in Afghanistan, but he found out about Mark's death by accident, really. But he just happened to hear the comms, and he was like, "Whoa, that's Mark's team." And so he ended up getting a flight out of there in some bad weather because he was Mark's escort. And we just talk about how he and Mark became friends, how he felt when he first saw Mark after he was killed, and then all the way through to the dignified transfer at Dover, where we were there, and to welcome, to welcome Mark's body back on American soil. And then Bobby also spoke at the funeral and at a memorial service in North Carolina. So he's been a great friend. He was a great friend of Mark. He's been a great friend to us. And we're happy for Bobby. He was married back this spring, and now he is going to be a new daddy coming up this winter. And he's in the Guard. He's in grad school. He's working. So great things going on with him, and he's a great American patriot that has served our country at an elite level. And so I hope you enjoy this time with him that's both happy and also there's some somber moments too. So if you're not interested in hearing an entire episode that's basically about Mark, my brother, then this is not the episode for you. But it's a special one, and it's important to me to have these things recorded. Now, a lot of this is covered in my book, My Brother in Arms, but some of it is not. Plus, it's nice to have an oral history as well. So how did you and Mark become friends?
Mark and I, we actually met at in the pipeline for combat control, originally down in San Antonio, Texas, which is where we do our selection process for about 2 weeks. So we met down there, and we actually went through the entire pipeline, so about 2 years of training together.
Yeah, so maybe on the surface, y'all may not have had a ton in common, but y'all became great friends. So how did y'all start hanging out? And despite, I know you're a few years difference in your age, and you were probably not as tame as Mark was.
So I mean, honestly, it was just like a brotherhood, like all the stuff you hear about and people going through, difficult times together. It's just something scientific that brings people closer together. And so, it was interesting because we did have a pretty diverse group of guys that went through the pipeline together. So I think in other circumstances, maybe we wouldn't all have been that close per se. But yeah, I mean, Mark and I just kind of gravitated towards each other. I mean, we had similarities, but I mean, in terms of our upbringing, we were very different. He's from the South, I'm from up north. He was walking a very religious path, and I'm not saying that I don't, but I mean, it wasn't nearly as centered in my life as it was for him. I mean, we were just kind of hit common ground, throughout the couple of years of training that we had, and then I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later, but we lived together in North Carolina after training was over. So, I don't know, it was kind of common that you just kind of gravitated towards people, and, Mark and I kind of clicked.
What about, how did you each help each other? I definitely know you helped Mark in the style area, and then maybe what did he do for you, for both of you?
Yeah. Yeah, I know we talked about that before, and I was joking Mark that he had old lady style, and so I kind of helped him out. He I guess we took him to the mall a couple times and kind of pointed out some stuff that I think might work for him. So it was pretty funny, but Yeah, I mean, Mark was just like kind of like an older, wiser type of, friend, and kind of almost looked at him as like an older brother, kind of. He's just a very, very intelligent guy. I could kind of go with him or go to him to ask any type of question, whether it be related to our job or just kind of life experience. He was really a level-headed guy, so he was easy to talk to and offer like, common sense advice, so I would always be able to kind of approach him about, pretty much anything. And it was nice to kind of have that central or like, I guess, non-biased opinion. And so, yeah, it was pretty neat just kind of have him around in that aspect.
What about with women? Did you help him out in that area? Because he always, would complain about, we go out and eat, and he always had a dude serving him. And
yeah, I mean, the thing is actually, believe it or not, I mean, I'm sure you believe it, but, Mark attracted, the females. There's no question about it. He, I don't know, obviously he's a good-looking guy, and girls kind of, were definitely attracted to him. So, I mean, I feel like he kind of held his own on that. But the thing is like, Mark was definitely a unique person. And so, when girls would meet him, like, obviously they'd think he's like kind of like this bigger-than-life, personality just because he's just such a, like, awesome guy to be around. But at the same time, they didn't really know how to, like, take him because he was just so much different than your, a normal, like, bro off the street, so to speak. I don't know how else to put it. But, no, it was always pretty interesting to watch, for sure.
So when y'all got your assignments for your first deployment, I mean, what were y'all's thoughts, and did you find out at the same time? And also, I'm curious, with Mark going to Cobra, did y'all talk about that much? And then how did your deployments differ from where you were to where Mark was?
Yeah, so I mean, originally after training, we both actually Mark originally got assigned to Florida, a unit down there, and he seemed like he was happy with it at first, and then he kind of was like, I don't know about this, like, I heard the North Carolina unit's a little bit better, and so I originally got stationed there, and so he was kind of like, yeah, I think I want to kind of transfer or like switch with somebody, because there was a guy that was supposed to be going with me, and so Mark asked if he could switch, and got approval to come and be stationed in North Carolina with me, so it was cool. And so, we went through our training there, upgrade training, and then, Mark really excelled in the at the JTAC thing, the Joint Terminal Attack Controller, and so did I. I mean, like, it just came a little bit more naturally to him because he's just a really intelligent guy. So anyways, based on our performance, once we got to our active duty units, kind of dictated like where you would go, where you deploy downrange to Afghanistan. And, it was kind of unprecedented that Mark was chosen to go to Cobra because, like, basically how it was, like, every guy would kind of be in the hopper, so to speak, and say, hey, 10 guys are deploying this for the next 6 months, and we're prepping for that. And, these are the 10 slots available. And so it was kind of like a rack and stack on who was the most experienced usually, but also kind of like who was the best JTAC to fit the most active positions. And so for us, I think it was 5 of us that were going and 5 of us that needed to fill 5 positions downrange. And so it just so happened that Cobra happened to be one of those places that needed to be backfilled. And so of the 5 guys that were deploying, Mark happened to be the, I guess, best JTAC of those 5, and so he was selected to go. And I say the best because he was not the most experienced, but he was the best. So there were other guys that had more experience than him, but just kind of didn't show the aptitude that Mark showed. So that was ultimately how he got selected to go to Cobra. And it's an interesting thing because there was some heartburn over that decision. There were people that were not happy about that, people that were either currently home stationed, and there were guys downrange saying like, hey, you should move me here. And, this is Mark's first deployment. He shouldn't necessarily be going to Cobra. And so that was kind of a point of contention at the time for our unit. And of course, like, I know I'm kind of getting a little long-winded here with this question, but, Mark proved over the 5 months that he was at Cobra that he should be there. Like, so, obviously he was brand new as his first deployment, but, he spent 5 complete months at that location and did very, very great things for his team and for himself and, to represent combat control as a whole. So I think what I'm trying to get at is it's an testament to the level of professionalism and, the level of, I guess, quality of guy that you were dealing with. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. What did he tell you, Bobby, when he found out? And I'm guessing that he knew at least some of the chatter going on. What were his thoughts on it?
Yeah, so it was interesting because, like, he told me, one day he was like, hey, kind of like, whispered it, so to speak, like, hey, man, I guess there's some rumors going around that I might be going to Cobra. And I was like, yeah, I don't know about that, man. Like, it just seemed a little bit of a far-fetched idea. And just because it was so outside the norm, of what typically happened. And so, I kind of was just, I guess it was, to a sense, I was like envious because I was like, oh, it's going to be awesome. You're going to do awesome things. You're going to be, in a very active place, which is obviously all of us wanted to be. But at the same time, I was, I was a little bit skeptical because I knew, like, hey, man, like, this is not a game. Obviously we train hard, but it's like, you kind of want the best for your best friend. And I know that was a very challenging place to be. And so, obviously I didn't let him know this, but it was worrisome because, I just know that place is nowhere to mess around. It was not forgiving, I guess you could say.
Do you think it bothered him that some other people were upset that he was going?
No, I don't think it bothered him. I don't think that's a good word for it. I think he was honestly more concerned, like, because he was just always, like, interested in, like, being people's friends and, making a good reputation and an impression on people. And so I think he was more, like, of the mindset that, he didn't really want to make people mad or make enemies because he was chosen to go there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, he told me, I remember him telling me that he was going to Cobra, and he said, hey, don't say anything about that right now, Thad, because I think some people aren't happy about it. And I didn't understand what that meant at all. I mean, I understand much more now, but he just like, hey, just want you to know this is where I'm going. Of course, I knew nothing about it at the time.
Yeah.
So how did his deployment, now y'all are in country, how did his differ from yours?
Yeah, so, I mean, the thing is like, Afghanistan is such a complex place, and, it's very tribal, right? So, it's just got, I'll kind of like equate it to, being in the United States. Like, if you're in, Southern California, it is a much different culture than it is in Alabama, and that's the best way to describe it. And so it's very similar in Afghanistan. Whatever region you're in, it's very, very different. And so with that comes, people who were, on the side, so to speak, of the Taliban, or, it was a safe haven for them, or maybe a stronghold for them. And so, places tend to be more active than others. And, that's dynamic too. It's not always like one place is always the worst and the next place is, so it changed, right? But for me, it was pretty I got my feet wet really quick. I think it was the second day in country, and it was, I was in a very, very close engagement with, rifles, up to 20 to 30 meters. That's, it's relatively close. And so I definitely got my feet wet quickly, but it wasn't covert, right? So it was just, it was just kind of one of those happenstance where, like, it would just kind of picked up, and, we had a couple bad guys in the area, and we just kind of took care of it. And, it was onesies and twosies type thing. And so, it was just a different feel. And, like, when you're a Cobra, that environment is like, you have no white space is what we call it. And so basically, as soon as you leave your compound, you just don't know who's bad and who's good. And so naturally, it's just this uneasy feeling traveling around in that environment. So, in terms of dropping ordnance, I didn't drop nearly as much as him. So it's, I think he was pretty routinely dropping. So I think, in terms of like having active deployment, I think he was definitely much more active than I was.
How did you and him communicate? Because I know you kept in touch pretty regularly, or I think you did.
Yeah. No, I had just like this crappy little internet that we were able to, I think the government gave us. So, I was literally living out in the middle of a village, so I wasn't at a base. And so it was rough living for me. I like Mark was at a fob, so it was, somewhat built up. It's definitely not, it's definitely not paradise by any means, but it was a little bit more than what I had. I was living out of a safe house, basically. And so anyways, we had a government issued, network or whatever that connected to satellites. We'd talk mostly online, I guess, through email. And every so often we'd call through the Iridium phones, satellite phones, and chat over the phone. And I think the last time I talked to Mark was probably about, I'd say, a week or two before he was killed.
Okay. Well, what was your conversation about?
Our last conversation?
Yeah, the last one.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So, obviously I was kept abreast of what he was doing, and, I vice versa. And so I always knew, and obviously I was able to read sit reps that, things were busy for him. And so, we'd talk, and, he'd kind of allude to the fact that he felt he was being targeted. And, obviously it's like, if you went out in your backyard, you kind of know your neighbors, right? So the people that are surrounding you. And so I think that's kind of the feeling I got from our conversations was that, he was in that location for 5 months. I had a feeling that people knew who he was, and he felt like they were targeting him. And then he told me that. And he said, man, I feel like, each time I go out, the rounds are getting closer and closer. And I was just like, hey, man, you got to be careful. Just keep your head down. We only have a month left and we're out of here. So, just kind of just bear with it, try to, it's hard to say because it's like, you want to be like, hey, man, keep your head down and just kind of ride out the next month. But at the same time, it's not always your choice to, pick and choose what you're doing, if you're going on missions, if you're not. And so it's kind of like it was almost like this concern that he was, indirectly talking to me about. But, I really could only offer so much advice, just, like I said, and, in hindsight, I look back on that conversation and I kind of felt like it was one of those, those moments where God was speaking to both of us in our conversation. It was kind of like, I don't know, I might be reading a little bit too much into it, but it was like, was he kind of like saying, hey, this could be it for me? I don't know. I look back and I'm like, man, did he have enough, thought or information, I guess you could say, to be like, this was like his way of just kind of prepping. I don't know. I mean, obviously Mark was very close with God, and he was very in touch with, those type of feelings. And, I can't help but to think that was the case. It was kind of his way of just being like, hey man, like if I don't talk to you, like, that's the luck. I mean, I don't know.
So that was 1 to 2 weeks before he was killed?
Yeah. I think it was about a week or so before he was on his last mission. So.
Well, and I've never heard that, Bobby. It's interesting because, as I've said before, and I said this at Mark's funeral, I noticed, and I know Joseph said the same thing, that he noticed Mark started telling us that he loved us, and then he would, and the frequency of that, upped. And I wonder the same thing is, you were looking back, he's talking about being targeted and the rounds getting closer, and that probably also affected his interactions with us.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I can't remember, like, you and I have talked so much, and honestly, I don't remember what I've said and what I haven't, but, it's definitely one of those things that, I don't really talk too much about it, but, I do vividly remember our conversation, our last conversation, and, I think I've talked to Johnny a bit about it, and so it's one of those things where you can't help but wonder if that's kind of, what the direction that conversation is going,
Mm-hmm. So take us to that day on September 29th and how you almost basically accidentally found out about his death and how all that went down.
Yeah, so I was at I actually moved about 4 months into my deployment. I moved to a different site, so I was at a little bit bigger of a site. We actually had like a proper, setup, and it was a bit like Mark's, like a fob, and I was in the operations center, which is, like the focal point of where we do a lot of our planning and coordination for internal to the team. And, we had satellite communication set up with a speaker box, and you can hear, people all around Afghanistan, the soft community, calling in and talking about, what they're doing and where they're at. So you can basically listen to what other teams are doing. And so, I had walked into the operations center after doing some whatever, I don't know, messing around at my room, and I was going to do sending out some emails, and I heard that his team, I heard there's call sign, his team leader or team sergeant come over the SATCOM radio and declare that they were in troops contact, which means, they're in a firefight. And I could tell by his voice that he was pretty frantic. And so I wasn't too alarmed by it just because I'd heard it a lot before, right? So,
Bobby, was this Wes Wilson, or do you know who it was?
I don't know if it was Wes, but I assume it was, because usually it's the team leaders that would call up and, communicate with higher headquarters. And so I heard who potentially could have been Wes call up, announce his call sign, and I was like, okay, that's Mark's team's in a tick, and he's passing information about the enemy and all that stuff. And then a little bit of time goes by, and then I hear, I assume, the information made its way back to Wes or whoever the team leader was, and found out about Mark and Calvin. And so I was sitting there, and over the SATCOM comes, the call sign, and then that person said, to higher headquarters, he said, hey, our JTAC and our Delta are KIA, killed in action. And so, naturally I had this really, like, I could feel my skin tightening up, and I was kind of like, I didn't really want to believe it, because it was kind of like, oh man, that must be somebody else, but because I know there were other teams co-located and, other JTACs in that area. And so I was just kind of like in denial. And so I looked, just to confirm on the spreadsheet that I had that was in fact Mark's team. I was like, okay, yeah, that's Mark's team. And so I verified the call sign. Then I was like, okay, like, let me read what's going on. I was like, okay, yeah, Mark is out today, but I'm like, it still could be somebody else. And then, so then I'm, obviously I'm a bit panicked at that point. I'm just like, man, this can't be happening. And then, so I ended up picking up the phone and I called back to the stock, which is basically where it's the hub for combat control teams it's basically the hub for combat control in Afghanistan. And I called back to get a hold of my commander who's in country, and Amy Osborne picked up, and she said, I said, hey, this is Bobby. And she was kind of quiet, and I said, is that Mark's team? And she was dead silent. She didn't say anything. And then I could tell that she was kind of holding back tears. And then the next thing she said to me was, what can I do for you? And I was just really, really overwhelmed at the time. And so I threw the phone down. I was furious. That was kind of the only way I could react. And I threw the phone down and just ran out of the operations center. I was just really upset. And so, my team leader and my team sergeant were both in the operations center, and they knew what was going on. They could see what I was doing, and they knew that my friend had been killed. I didn't have to tell them. They just kind of put the pieces together based on what I was doing and the conversations I were having. So then I went to my room and just, I don't know, put my head down, and then I went outside, just kind of was trying to gather my thoughts. And then, my team leader came up, and man, it was crazy because like he was, his eyes were watering and stuff. And I was just kind of shocked that like my emotions had touched him so much that he was feeling that way. And, he's like, what can you do? Well, what can I do for you? And so I was like, yeah, I got to get out of here, man. This is, I gotta go escort Mark. I mean, there's just no question about it. That was something him and I had talked about beforehand. And so then I went back in the operations center. I called back. Amy answered, and I said, hey, you need to get me a flight out of here. And so she started working it. And then in the meantime, I was going to pack my stuff. So because I knew I wasn't going to come back if I brought Mark home. So that's basically where that leads off.
Did you break anything before, like in your anger?
No, not really. I mean, I threw the phone down. I mean, I wasn't like, my intent wasn't to break it. It was just kind of, didn't really know. I wasn't really subconsciously kind of just doing that. But yeah, I mean, I was packing my stuff pretty quick. I'd already been there for a month, so I was kind of settled in. But the team, they're like, man, you're leaving? I'm like, yeah, I got to go. Because, it's one of those things where if you decide that you're going to bring home your buddy, and that's the agreement we made, it's going to happen. So it was interesting because, the weather actually was really bad where I was. I was in eastern Afghanistan at the time. And so they couldn't get me a flight out because the weather was called red. The weather was wet, the red, excuse me. And so that means like you can't fly in it. And so I was like, well, and so basically my commander and everybody knew how much, that would mean to me to bring Mark home, and I was pretty determined to do it. They actually went through and jumped through some hoops to get me a medevac, which is the only thing that can really fly in red air, which is, it was definitely one of those things where they were pulling some strings, no doubt. And so the medevac came that night, picked me up, finding weather they shouldn't have been, and brought me to, I think, one other airfield that was close. It was a helicopter, and then fixed wing took me to Kandahar, which is where I ended up meeting Mark.
Bobby, what were your feelings when you first saw him there at Kandahar?
Yeah, so I showed up. I landed in Kandahar, and my commander and I think my team leader, if I remember correctly, picked me up in a truck, and obviously they asked me, and they said, "Hey, do you want to see Mark?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so they brought me straight from the airfield to basically, I think it was just kind of like I don't know, I guess morgue. I don't know what other word to use. I don't know if it was called something else, but so they brought me in, and then basically they opened this thing up and brought Mark out and just put him on a table, basically. And
Bobby, first of all, was he in the transfer case at that time, those casket-like things, or was he in something else?
No, he wasn't in that. He was just like on a table, basically, on like a little, like a gurney almost, that you'd see at an ambulance carries around. And yeah, it was tough, because it looked like Mark, I mean, nothing, he had only been killed for a couple hours, so it was, like everything was very intact. His body was normal, and so like they cleaned him up, obviously, and he didn't have a shirt on. I don't think he had any clothes on, but he had something covering his waist down, and so he's just kind of sitting there. And I noticed his left arm had it was bandaged up. And I thought that was kind of weird with some gauze. So I don't know exactly why it was bandaged up, but his chest, you could clearly see a hole in it, and on the side and the left of his pec. And other than that, like everything looked normal. It looked like Mark, and so it was really weird because when you see someone that's like just they look like themselves, it's just like it's weird to just kind of be like, all right, they're not going to communicate back with you. It was a tough time, and I thought the room. I thought I had the room to myself, so I was just kind of, I got pretty emotional, obviously, and then I had like kind of spent probably 10 minutes just kind of taking a knee and just doing a little praying and just talking, and then I looked back and I realized that my commander and I think my team leader were still in the room, so I don't know, I felt like I had my 10 minutes of peace and kind of, it was time to kind of move on. It was tough. So I didn't really, I wanted to stay longer, but I didn't. So it was kind of like, maybe I should just go now. Just kind of felt like it was the right time to be done.
Was the team leader Greg Walsh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was.
And I asked some of these questions because I'm trying to put some things together based on, things I've heard over the years.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was my team leader was Greg Walsh. I'm just trying to remember if he was there. I think he was. I think it was him and my commander. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Bobby, what happened after that? Because we've got that picture, and the folks, listeners, if you go to my website thadforster.com or patriottothecore.com. First of all, when you go to that for the first time, you're going to get a drop down, and you're going to be able to sign up and get Chapter 3 of my book for free. And that's a lot of this is talked about in Chapter 3. You'll get Bobby's firsthand account, and also on the post for this, the show notes for this episode is the picture of Bobby standing there in the C-17 at Kandahar. So at that point, you got the transfer case with a flag draped over it. When did that take place? Obviously, Mark had to be moved from the gurney type thing to that casket.
Yeah.
Do you know what happened?
No. So basically, when I was done, it was basically that. I think that was the time from then forward they were prepping Mark, because I think it was probably a good like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning once I got to Kandahar and saw Mark and all that stuff. And the plan was to get on that flight. I think it was like at 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and fly out of there and head straight to Germany, I think, and then straight to Dover from there. So I think from the time I left, they had prepped Mark to kind of be in that, that a casket you're describing. And I basically there really wasn't enough time to sleep or anything, so I just basically stayed up, got some food, and then packed my stuff, made sure it was good to go, did a little bit out processing, and then that morning, right before our flight, basically they do the unloading ceremony at Kandahar where they, pay their respects and load the fallen onto the C-17. I think collectively there was 3 guys on the plane. So they loaded Mark's body, and then they kind of let people come in and pay their last respects, and then that's where that picture was taken. And close by was Calvin, which is Mark's medic that was also killed with him, and one other individual. I don't remember exactly who. I can't remember if it was a Marine or somebody, but there was 3 total on the plane, which is kind of crazy because C-17 holds a bunch of stuff. I mean, I think a couple tanks or whatever it can hold, and the thing was empty. It was literally empty, minus 3 caskets and 3 escorts, and then the air crew. So it's pretty amazing to see, that level of honor and given to the fallen soldiers. I mean, that's a big resource to dedicate to bringing back 3 guys, and so it was pretty interesting. But it was a very long flight. I chatted with Calvin's escort, who I think was also on Mark's team, and he was one of the SF guys. And so him and I talked a little bit, and that's kind of when I got on my computer on that very long flight home. You kind of sleep a little bit, and then I got on my computer and I wrote a bunch of stuff down. It was kind of weird because I didn't know that I was going to speak at Mark's funeral and the dedication ceremony down in Herbert Field, so I didn't plan for that. But I had a bunch of stuff written down because it was one of those things where I couldn't think of anything else to do besides just reflect on our time together, and it just made sense because there was a lot of emotions and memories that were coming back during that flight, and I was just like, man, I couldn't risk losing that, so I wanted to put it on paper, and so I was typing, and then I think when I landed in Dover, eventually I found out that I was going to be speaking at those events, so it kind of naturally made sense that I would just, incorporate a lot of the stuff I already had written.
Who asked you to speak?
I can't remember if it was your mom or somebody. Honestly, I don't remember who asked me to speak at Mark's funeral. It might have been you. I don't know.
Okay.
And then, and so that was, it's interesting because I'm not really big for the spotlight. I don't really typically enjoy being in front of people speaking, and so, but it was really weird because during that time at Mark's funeral, it was came very natural, and it felt like it was really easy to do because everything was just so genuine. When you're talking about a topic that is very genuine to you, it's kind of easy to do. And so, although it was difficult being that, the situation, but the words kind of came pretty easily, which is kind of an interesting thing I observed from doing that.
Mm-hmm. And you did a really good job, Bobby, and it was mixed with humor and with, I guess sadness. And you did it Thursday at the funeral and Friday at the memorial there in North Carolina, and so we appreciate you doing that. I remember we were waiting there at Dover for the plane to arrive, and it's funny now. I guess we knew you were coming.
Yeah.
I figure we knew. Did we know you were coming, or do you even know?
Yeah, you did, because
Okay.
I remember your mom. She was, she knew that I was going to be there, and so I remember you guys saying that you were really happy and thankful that I was able to do that. And, I know your mom was just, tough seeing her because it just felt so terrible for her. And
describe that meeting and embrace with Mom at Dover.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, one of those moments, special moment, because, I feel like that's the point where, I mean, I literally had met your mom once before, I believe, and that was, basically the last time that Mark saw your parents, which was down in Florida when we were deploying. And so I literally had only met her once, but I felt like I knew her really well just because Mark and I spent so much time together, and I'm sure that we came up in conversation with each other as a family. And it was tough because, I just hated seeing her mom, who's just the sweetest lady, just in so much pain, and it's just the only way to describe it. She had lost her son, and it's just, I couldn't even imagine the feeling that she was going through. And so it was kind of, but, it was weird because, I kind of felt that, we just instantly made this connection. And that's why I feel like, your mom and I have really, kind of kept close over the last, couple of years. And it's just, I think it was one of those things that was special for her that I was able to do that for her son. And obviously there's no way that I could ever replace Mark, but I feel like her and I have this kind of connection now that we're, it kind of, a little piece of me, lives on, and whatever, a little piece of Mark lives on in me, I guess however you want to put it. But it was tough. It was tough seeing everybody there and seeing the whole family and your dad. Just, I don't know. It was weird because I'm like, what do you say? I mean, it's always one of those things where you literally, like, people ask, like, what do you say? And it just, I don't know. There is no answer. You really can't say anything. And so there wasn't much said, if I recall.
Well, I remember, I think it was me, I remember asking you as we were kind of standing around before we had gone out for the actual ceremony. And I said, hey, Bobby, did you see Mark, and how did he look?
Yeah.
And you started to answer, and you kind of looked over at Colonel Armfield for permission, is it okay? And then he kind of nodded, and you said, yeah, his arm and his upper chest. I mean, what do you remember about that? And then what else do you remember about us as a family, how we looked and how we acted?
Yeah. It was just, you just never know what in those situations, like I said, what should be said, what shouldn't be said. And especially since, I didn't know what you had heard and what you hadn't heard. And I felt like I was kind of walking on eggshells. I feel like you guys were looking to me for answers. And I had, Colonel Armfield, who now is General Armfield, I think is retired now. But, I didn't want to put myself in a weird position where I was saying something I shouldn't be. And so, I was kind of treading lightly. And then, I just remember you guys all grouped together, a very tight family, and just kind of looking at me and just, it was one of those things where I don't think there was any relief. I don't know. I can't really describe what I felt when I saw you guys in terms of like it was kind of like disbelief, but just like you might have been looking for answers. I don't know. It was really hard to describe.
Yeah, and for us too. But it was a good thing to see you. I know it was for me anyway.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, when you went back, Bobby, you were going back, you were getting redeployed not too long after that, and you called me and you told me you had some options, and you were angry. This is what I remember. You wanted some revenge, but you said, hey, I've got these options that I just wanted to get your thoughts on it, of these two locations to go. And you also wanted to wear Mark's Don't Tread on Me patch that he was wearing when he was killed. So you got that and took it back. But I don't know, what can you say about that next pretty quick deployment, and did you make the right decision?
Yeah, so kind of how it boiled down was a couple months after, I think it was in like December. So I got back, Mark was killed in September, and then I think an offer came across the bow to go and deploy to Cobra, and so that was a really quick turnaround. I think I left in February, and so like I mentioned, actually the mission Mark was killed on. It was actually a really successful mission in kind of driving out the Taliban and setting kind of like kind of cleaning them out more or less out of that valley, and so. So, that was the upside, is that, Mark really had a huge impact on that area and really kind of changed it. And so the dilemma, I guess, so to speak, was the option was to go to Cobra. And then, I had other people telling me that if I wanted to really be involved with fighting the people that Mark was fighting, I should go to somewhere else south of there in Helmand. And so it was kind of a tough, and that's basically what I proposed to you. I was like, what do you think I should do? Do you think I should go to Cobra, or do you think I should go to Helmand? And so it was like, should I go try to fight the people in Helmand, or should I go back to Cobra and see what remnants is left and fight those guys? And so ultimately I decided to go to Cobra because I felt right. And, I ended up a little bit farther south of Cobra. It wasn't at the actual FOB because things had kind of spread out, and the deployment was fine. It wasn't as active as I had hoped. We did find out a decent bit of information that kind of led us to ultimately figuring out like who the main orchestrator of that attack was. In September, where it killed Mark, and unfortunately, due to regulations and the administration at the time, they were so strict on what we could and couldn't do. Naturally, I was just furious because it was tough because we kind of, generally speaking, knew where these people were, and potentially the person that even orchestrated the attack, and we were basically told we couldn't go to go, kind of unleash on them. And, you can imagine how frustrating that must have been for me. And, I don't know. I don't know. It was kind of like almost like one of those feelings where people are dangling a carrot and you just don't even, you're starving and you need something. But, at the end of the day, I think, once things kind of loosened up, people were able to go in that area and do good work. And, but it was tough because, knowing what I knew and kind of being restrained was not a good thing for me. And, ultimately, I look back on that deployment and I feel like, I don't know if it did worse for me or better, but I kind of lean on the side of worse because it's just how things played out. So, that's just how it goes sometimes. You just can't ever predict on how things are going to turn out.
Yeah. Was it on that flight when you went back over is that where you met Mark or Cal's replacement and maybe Mark's team leader or something? What happened there? Because it's really interesting. You described that a bit.
Oh yeah, so when I was flying back from Kandahar with Mark and Cal, and basically, we stopped in Germany, and it just so happened that the guy that was replacing one of the team leaders at Cobra, because there was two teams, we ran into him, and the previous team leader is still alive. I think his name's Will, and but he was badly injured, and so this guy was coming from the States. We met him, bumped into him in Germany, and the guy that was escorting Cal home was obviously a Green Beret. He recognized the guy, so we went up and talked to him, and he's like, hey, what are you guys doing? Like, I'm on my way, and I'm heading to Cobra. And, him and this guy and I looked at each other, and we're like, oh, man, like should we even talk to him about, And so ultimately we decided, the reality is, we should disclose like what we're doing. And so we're like, yeah, we're escorting 2 guys home right now. They're dead. That literally just came from Cobra. And it was, I think it was pretty eye-opening for that gentleman. It was his first deployment. And so, you can imagine the way that he felt. And, we kind of felt a little bit of anxiety telling him because, that's a lot of weight to put on someone's shoulders. But at the same time, like, I think the weight of, the reality is something also good to know. So, yeah, it was interesting. I mean, the look on this guy's face is I'll never forget it. And, it's just tough to be in that situation.
Yeah, I imagine that would be concerning. You're going to an area where 2 guys on your team were just killed. And, so that would have been Will Lyle's replacement, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
And Will has been on the podcast. I forgot which episode, but Will was one of the earlier episodes. And for the listeners, he lost his legs over there. I think it was in August. So August of 2010, right? A little over a month before Mark was killed. Month and a half.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Bobby, to wrap it up, I mean, what has Mark's impact been on your life?
Yeah, man, that's a hard one to sum up in a sentence. But at the end of the day, it was it was an absolute pleasure to kind of live alongside him for the couple of years that I did, and it was certainly a turning point for me. And honestly, I felt like when him and I were together, it was he was a really good impact and influence on my life. And there was a couple of years after that, I was a little bit lost. I had a lot of different emotions going on, and so I kind of feel like I went down a weird path for a little while, and not necessarily something I'm, that proud of, but I think ultimately the impression that he left, kind of led me back to where I am today, which is in a really good spot, and both, physically and spiritually, and I have a wife and kid on the way, and I really feel like, that influence that he had on me was definitely, something that I'll always carry with me, and I'll be able to kind of instill on the people that I, come across, and I'm actually still in, the career field, so that, I feel like it's so important for guys to really understand who Mark was and keep his legacy alive, and I feel like it's just the only way to honor people that, make that sacrifice is just to continue to talk about them and never forget them.
Yeah, well, Bobby, my family and I thank you tremendously for your loyalty and friendship to Mark and also to us. And, just for keeping in touch with us and for coming around. And we are very happy for you. I mean, yeah, you're working full time. You're in the Guard. You're in grad school. You're married. Yep. You got a baby on the way in December, right? I think December, January.
Yeah, December.
Yeah. So, man, very happy for you.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Anything else?
No, I think that's it, man. It was a pleasure, and I'm glad we could, kind of commemorate Mark's life a little bit and shed some light for the listeners.
Yeah, thank you. This is a really good interview to be for September 29th as we commemorate the 7th anniversary of the death of Mark. So thank you for talking about it and for kind of stirring up some emotions with me, and I know it will with at least some of the listeners, including some of my family that'll be listening, and I think it probably did with you too. But big appreciation, buddy. Great hearing from you, and we'll talk with you or see you sometime soon.
Okay. All right. Take care, Dad.
When I fly that plane, call the angel flight. Got a hero riding with us tonight.